They left an Apache mother and 6 children alone in the desert to die. The midday sun had become their executioner, the sand their grave. But when a lone cowboy stumbled upon their broken bodies beneath that ancient saguaro, he made a vow that would shatter every boundary the frontier had ever known. He looked into the eyes of those 6 identical, abandoned children and spoke words that would change everything. I am your father now, forever. The Arizona Territory in 1882 was a land that demanded allegiance to invisible lines, white or Apache, civilized or savage, worthy or expendable. Judah Albright had spent 38 years walking those lines alone, a man whose childhood had taught him the bitter taste of abandonment. Orphaned young, raised by the indifferent charity of strangers, he had learned to find companionship in the wild horses he broke, solace in the vast emptiness of the desert. His cabin stood miles from Ironwood Gulch, a testament to his preference for solitude over society. The work of rounding up mustangs suited him. Horses didn't judge, horses didn't leave. That particular morning had begun like countless others. Goliath, his massive roan stallion, carried him across the scorched landscape in search of a herd rumored to water near Coyote Springs. The heat rose in shimmering waves, distorting the horizon into liquid mirages. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic strike of hooves against hardpan and the occasional cry of a circling hawk. Judah had learned to read the desert like other men read newspapers, and something in the quality of the stillness made him uneasy. The birds were too quiet. The air tasted of fear. He found them at noon when the sun showed no mercy and shadows retreated to nothing. The saguaro rose like a green sentinel, and beneath its inadequate shade lay what he first mistook for a pile of discarded blankets. Then one of the bundles moved. Judah dismounted before conscious thought caught up with instinct, his boots hitting the sand as his eyes took in the full horror of the scene. A woman, her dark hair matted with dust and sweat, her lips cracked and bleeding. Around her, pressed against her body as if trying to disappear into her very flesh, were 6 children, identical, their faces mirror images of terror and exhaustion, their small bodies trembling despite the furnace heat. The woman's eyes opened when his shadow fell across her face. They were black and bottomless, holding a desperation that transcended language. Her hand moved, a gesture so weak it barely disturbed the air, pointing to her mouth to the children's mouths. Water, the universal language of the dying. Judah didn't hesitate. He uncapped his canteen and knelt, supporting her head with a gentleness that surprised him, letting her drink in small, careful sips. The children watched with eyes too knowing for their years, understanding that their survival hung on the charity of this stranger. Her name, she told him in halting English learned from a missionary, was Tala. Morning Star. The children were Asher, Naomi, Micah, Seth, Rachel, and Leah. 6 years old, born in a single miraculous night that her band had celebrated as a blessing from the spirits. Now that blessing had become a curse. The U.S. cavalry had been pursuing their group for 3 weeks, driving them deeper into the merciless desert. The band's leaders had made the calculation that only the strong and fast could survive. 6 small children and their mother slowed everyone down. Better to sacrifice 7 than lose 70. They had been left with a single blanket, a leather pouch of dried meat, and the ancient saguaro for shelter. A death sentence wrapped in practicality. Judah felt something crack open inside his chest, a place he had kept sealed since childhood. He knew, with absolute certainty, what it meant to be deemed expendable, to be the burden that others cast off to save themselves. He looked at the 6 small faces, each one a perfect copy of the others, and saw his own orphaned self reflected back at him. Asher, the apparent eldest, by minutes managed a trembling smile. Naomi's fingers wrapped around Judah's wrist with surprising strength, as if she could anchor herself to this stranger who represented impossible hope. Micah reached out to touch Goliath's massive leg with wonder. Seth and Rachel clung to each other, while Leah buried her face against Tala's shoulder. The decision formed in his mind with the clarity of a bell struck in the desert silence. Judah removed his hat, that battered symbol of his identity as a lone cowboy, and pressed it against his chest. The gesture felt ceremonial, a crossing from one life into another. His voice, rough from disuse and emotion, carried a conviction that startled him with its intensity. He looked at each child in turn, meeting their frightened eyes with absolute certainty. "I don't know much about being a father," he told them, the words emerging from a place deeper than reason. "But nobody in this world is going to abandon you again. You are my family now, forever." The word forever hung in the scorching air like a promise made to the desert itself, binding and irrevocable. Tala's eyes filled with tears that she was too dehydrated to shed. She reached up and touched Judah's weathered face with trembling fingers, and in that touch passed something beyond gratitude. Recognition. She saw in him what he saw in her children, a soul that understood what it meant to be left behind. The journey to Ironwood Gulch tested every ounce of Judah's frontier pragmatism. Goliath, accustomed to carrying only his master and the occasional pack, now bore the weight of 7 desperate souls. Tala rode in front, her children arranged around her and Judah like precious cargo. Asher perched behind his mother, his small arms wrapped around her waist. Naomi and Micah sat in front of the saddle, while Seth, Rachel, and Leah were secured in makeshift slings fashioned from Judah's rope and bedroll, pressed against his back. The massive horse moved with careful deliberation, as if understanding the fragility of his passengers. The landscape offered no comfort. The sun tracked across the sky with brutal efficiency, and the sparse shade of creosote bushes provided only moments of relief. Judah rationed the water with military precision, knowing that the 6-hour journey to town could easily become a death march if he miscalculated. He sang to the children, old songs he hadn't thought about in decades, ballads his mother had hummed before the fever took her. His voice cracked and broke, but the children responded to the sound, their tense bodies gradually relaxing against him. Tala spoke little during those hours, conserving her strength, but what she did say revealed the depth of her tragedy. She had been married to a warrior named Takota, a man respected among their band for his skill and wisdom. He had died 3 months prior, shot by settlers while hunting deer in what had once been Apache land. The band's leaders, already struggling to evade the cavalry, had viewed his widow and her unusually large family as an impossible burden. The decision to abandon them had been presented as mercy. They were left near the saguaro, a sacred plant, with the thin hope that perhaps the spirits would intervene. The spirits, Tala said with a bitter edge to her voice, had sent a cowboy instead. As Ironwood Gulch emerged from the heat shimmer, a cluster of weathered buildings clinging to existence at the base of rust-colored cliffs, Judah felt his stomach tighten. He knew this town. He had traded here for years, maintaining the minimal contact necessary for survival. He bought supplies, sold horses, and left. The people of Ironwood Gulch tolerated him because he caused no trouble and paid in coin. But bringing an Apache woman and 6 Apache children into the heart of this settlement, where memories of raids and reprisals were fresh as yesterday's blood, was something else entirely. The main street fell silent as Goliath carried his unusual passengers into town. Doors opened. People emerged from the saloon, the dry goods store, the assay office. Their faces registered shock, then hardened into something uglier. Judah guided Goliath toward Dr. Gideon's small office, the only place he could think to go. The weight of hostile stares pressed against him like a physical force. Whispers rose and spread like wildfire. "That's Albright, he's gone mad. Bringing savages here, look at all those children. They all look the same. It's unnatural." Hester Vance, the town's most virulent gossip and self-appointed moral guardian, planted herself in the middle of the street, her bulk blocking the path. Her voice carried the sharp edge of righteous indignation. She demanded to know what Judah thought he was doing, bringing these people into a decent Christian town. She called the children half-wild creatures, said their presence would bring disease and danger. She invoked the memory of every settler killed by Apache warriors, as if these 6 exhausted children bore personal responsibility for those deaths. Judah had never been a man of many words, but something in Hester's venomous certainty ignited a fury he didn't know he possessed. He dismounted carefully, ensuring the children remained secure, and walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps. His voice, when he spoke, was low and cold as a winter wind cutting through canyon walls. He told her he had found these people dying in the desert, abandoned by their own and condemned by circumstance. He told her he had made a choice to save them, and that choice was final. He told her that if she, or anyone in this town, had a problem with his family, they could take it up with him directly. The word family fell from his lips with unmistakable emphasis, a line drawn in the dust. Dr. Gideon emerged from his office, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and the permanent stoop of someone who spent his days bent over the suffering. He was Mexican by birth, a fact that placed him in an uncomfortable middle ground in the rigid hierarchy of the frontier. He took in the scene with practiced efficiency: the dehydrated woman, the exhausted children, the furious cowboy. He waved Judah inside without a word, ignoring Hester's protests. His office, cluttered with medical texts and bottles of dubious remedies, became a sanctuary. The doctor worked with quiet competence, examining each child with gentle thoroughness. He made Tala drink an electrolyte solution he mixed from precious salts and clean water, and he applied salve to the children's sun-blistered skin. While he worked, he spoke in a mixture of English and Spanish, his voice a soothing counterpoint to the tension. He told Judah that the woman and children would recover physically, given rest and proper nourishment. Then he added, with significant weight, that the greater danger was not from dehydration but from the town itself. Ironwood Gulch had lost 3 families to Apache raids in the past year. Prejudice, he said, ran deeper than any canyon. Judah understood the unspoken question. What happens now? His cabin was small, designed for one man's Spartan existence. 1 room, 1 bed, minimal supplies. It was also 6 miles from town, isolated in a way that would make schooling and medical care difficult. But the alternative, trying to find boarding in town, was impossible. No one would rent to him now. He made the decision aloud, cementing his commitment. They would make his cabin work. He would expand it, build additions as needed. The children would need education, and he would find a way to provide it. Dr. Gideon studied him for a long moment, then nodded with something like respect. He told Judah that Miss Abigail Williams, the schoolteacher, was a woman of unusual conviction. She might, if approached correctly, be willing to accept the children into her classroom. It would cause a scandal, but she had weathered scandals before. He also mentioned that Mrs. Hannigan at the general store, despite her gruff exterior, had a soft heart for lost causes. If Judah could secure credit there, he might be able to outfit his new family with proper clothing and supplies. As evening fell and the children slept on pallets in the doctor's back room, Judah sat outside on the wooden steps, staring at the darkening sky. The stars emerged one by one, brilliant and indifferent to human suffering. He thought about the enormity of what he had done. A few hours ago, he had been a solitary man, with no attachments and no obligations. Now he was responsible for 7 lives, each one vulnerable and wholly dependent on his ability to navigate a hostile world. The fear of failing them, of proving inadequate to this impossible task, threatened to overwhelm him. Then Asher appeared in the doorway, his small silhouette backlit by the lamp inside. The boy approached silently and sat down beside Judah, close but not touching. They sat together without speaking, watching the stars. After a long while, Asher spoke in halting English, words he must have learned from his mother. He said that his father, Dakota, had taught him that the stars were the campfires of ancestors, watching over the living. He asked if Judah's ancestors were up there too. Judah, his throat tight, said he supposed they were. Asher nodded, satisfied, and said that meant their families were together in the sky, which made them family on earth too. The logic was childish and perfect, and it broke something loose in Judah's chest. The transformation of Judah's cabin from bachelor quarters to family home happened with chaotic urgency. The single room, barely 15 feet square, had sufficed for a man who spent most of his time outdoors. Now it groaned under the weight of 7 additional lives. Judah worked with fevered determination, rising before dawn and laboring past dark. He built a lean-to addition against the north wall, framing it with rough-cut lumber hauled from the mill in Ironwood Gulch. Mrs. Hannigan, true to Dr. Gideon's prediction, had extended credit with a gruff warning that she expected payment within 6 months, and that she was only doing this because she couldn't stand to see children go without. The lean-to became the children's sleeping quarters, with 6 small cots arranged in 2 neat rows. Judah fashioned a curtain from canvas to separate it from the main room, giving Tala a measure of privacy in the corner near the fireplace. He built shelves, a larger table, and additional chairs from salvaged wood. The cabin filled with the sounds of life, children's laughter, Tala's soft singing, the clatter of cooking pots. The silence that had defined his existence for so long became a memory. Tala proved to be remarkably capable despite her ordeal. Within days of recovering her strength, she took charge of organizing their domestic life with quiet efficiency. She showed Judah how to stretch their food supplies using methods passed down through generations of Apache women. She taught the children their daily chores, instilling discipline with gentle firmness. She also worked to teach them English with renewed dedication, understanding that language would be their bridge to survival in this new world. Judah found himself learning alongside the children, picking up Apache words and phrases, discovering a richness in their culture that contradicted everything the townsfolk believed. The question of schooling loomed large. Judah made the journey into Ironwood Gulch on a crisp morning, his heart heavy with apprehension. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a whitewashed building with a bell tower and windows that caught the morning sun. Miss Abigail Williams, age 26, had come west from Boston 3 years prior with idealistic notions about educating frontier children. The reality had weathered some of her idealism, but strengthened her resolve. She answered Judah's knock with cautious curiosity, her intelligent eyes taking in his nervous demeanor. Judah explained his situation with uncharacteristic eloquence, driven by desperation. He told her about finding the family, about his vow, about the 6 children who deserved a chance at education despite the circumstances of their birth. He promised they would be well-behaved, clean, and eager to learn. He offered to pay whatever tuition she required, to provide supplies, to do anything necessary. Miss Williams listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, looking past him toward the town where smoke rose from morning fires. She told him, finally, that she had taken an oath when she became a teacher. That oath was to educate all children, without exception. She said the townspeople would be furious, that parents would threaten to withdraw their children, that she would face social ostracism. Then she smiled, a small, fierce expression that transformed her face. She said she had been ostracized before, for the crime of being an unmarried woman with opinions, and she had survived. 6 Apache children deserved education as much as any white child. She would expect them on Monday morning. The first day of school became a trial by fire. Judah escorted all 6 children into town, with Tala walking beside them. He had dressed the children in the new clothes purchased from Mrs. Hannigan, simple cotton shirts and trousers for the boys, modest dresses for the girls. Their dark hair was neatly braided or trimmed, their faces scrubbed clean. They looked like any other frontier children, except for the color of their skin and the fear in their eyes. The other students, about 20 in total, stared with open hostility. Parents who had brought their children to school confronted Miss Williams on the steps, demanding she refuse entry to the Apache children. Miss Williams stood firm, her voice carrying across the schoolyard with surprising authority. She reminded the parents that education was the foundation of civilization, and that denying education to any child was barbarism. She quoted scripture about welcoming strangers and protecting the innocent. She shamed them with their own professed Christian values. Most of the parents retreated, grumbling, but a few pulled their children out immediately, vowing never to return while the savages remained. Miss Williams watched them go without flinching, then turned to the 6 children and welcomed them inside with genuine warmth. The children proved to be remarkable students. Asher, the natural leader, absorbed information with quiet intensity. Naomi showed an aptitude for numbers that surprised even Miss Williams. Micah had an artistic gift, producing drawings of startling detail and beauty. Seth and Rachel excelled at memorization, reciting lessons with perfect accuracy. Leah, the shyest, revealed a gift for languages, picking up English faster than her siblings and helping translate for them. They worked with desperate dedication, understanding instinctively that education was their pathway to acceptance, their defense against a world that viewed them as less than human. But acceptance came slowly, grudgingly, and only through blood and courage. The crisis that would define their place in Ironwood Gulch arrived on an August evening, when the sky turned green and the air filled with electric tension. Desert storms were rare but violent, and this one promised to be historic. The wind arrived first, tearing at buildings and uprooting anything not secured. Then came the rain, not in gentle drops but in solid sheets that turned the street into a river within minutes. Thunder rolled across the landscape like artillery fire, and lightning struck with terrifying frequency. The main livery stable, the town's economic heart where horses and cattle were kept for traveling ranchers and merchants, took a direct hit. The lightning bolt split the main support beam, and the entire front section collapsed with a sound like the world ending. The animals, already panicked by the storm, exploded into the flooding street in a terrified stampede. Horses screamed and reared. Cattle bellowed and charged blindly. Sheep scattered in white waves of wool. The townsmen emerged from their shelters, attempting to control the chaos. But the combination of darkness, rain, and animal panic made it nearly impossible. Judah, Tala, and the children had been at the cabin when the storm hit, but Judah had driven the wagon into town to collect supplies before the weather worsened. They found themselves in the middle of the crisis, with livestock threatening to destroy storefronts and injure bystanders. Judah reacted immediately, his years of handling wild horses giving him an edge. But it was Tala who transformed the chaos into order. She moved into the rain with absolute confidence, her voice rising in an ancient song that cut through the storm's roar. The Apache had lived in harmony with animals for centuries, understanding their language in ways the settlers had forgotten. The horses responded to her song, to the particular cadence and tone that spoke of safety and calm. She approached the most panicked stallion, a massive black beast that had already kicked down part of the mercantile's porch, with no visible fear. She sang to him, her hands moving in slow, deliberate gestures. The horse's eyes rolled. Foam flecked his mouth, but gradually, impossibly, he stilled. Other horses, seeing their leader calm, began to settle. Tala directed the children with quick words in Apache, and they moved like a disciplined unit, each child taking position to guide the smaller livestock back toward shelter. The 6 children worked with stunning coordination, moving as one organism rather than 6 individuals. They used their identical appearances to their advantage, appearing in multiple places simultaneously, confusing and herding the sheep with expert precision. Asher and Micah focused on the cattle, using techniques their father had taught them, making themselves large and directing the animals' momentum. Naomi, Rachel, and Leah created a living corridor that funneled sheep back toward the damaged stable. Seth climbed onto a rain barrel and waved a piece of cloth, creating a visual marker that drew the animals' attention. The townspeople watched in stunned silence as this Apache family accomplished what their own efforts had failed to achieve. Within an hour, every animal was secured, either back in the stable or in temporary pens hastily constructed from salvaged lumber. The rain continued to fall, but the immediate crisis had passed. Judah stood in the street, water streaming from his hat, and met the eyes of the gathered crowd. No one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. It was Hester Vance who broke first. The woman who had been most vocal in her condemnation approached Tala with halting steps. Her face worked through a complicated series of emotions before settling on something resembling humility. She spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear, her voice stripped of its usual venom. She said she had been wrong. She said she had allowed fear and old hatreds to blind her to the humanity standing before her. She said the Albright family had saved the town's livelihood when her own people had been useless. She extended her hand to Tala, a gesture so unexpected that several people gasped. Tala looked at the offered hand for a long moment. The rain fell between them, washing away blood and dirt and history. Then she took Hester's hand, her grip firm and steady. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause, the sound mingling with thunder. Judah felt something shift in the air, a barrier crumbling that he had thought permanent. He gathered his children close, all 6 of them soaked and shivering but grinning with triumph. They had proven themselves in the language the frontier understood best: courage and competence in crisis. The weeks following the storm brought a subtle but undeniable shift in how Ironwood Gulch regarded the Albright family. Respect, grudging at first but gradually warming, replaced outright hostility. Families who had pulled their children from school sent them back with quiet apologies to Miss Williams. Men tipped their hats to Tala when she walked through town. Children who had once thrown rocks at the 6 siblings now invited them to play games during recess. The transformation was neither complete nor universal. Pockets of resentment remained, but the wall between worlds had developed cracks. Judah found himself navigating unfamiliar social territory. Invitations arrived, awkward at first, from families wanting to express their gratitude. Sunday dinners, community barn raisings, church socials, events he had always avoided now extended to include his entire family. Tala approached these gatherings with quiet dignity, her presence a constant reminder that Apache culture valued hospitality and community as much as any white settlement. The children, resilient in the way only children can be, adapted with remarkable speed, making friends and finding their place in the complex social ecosystem of frontier childhood. Dr. Gideon became a regular visitor to the cabin, bringing medical supplies, but more importantly, bringing books. He had recognized in the children, particularly in Asher and Naomi, a hunger for knowledge that transcended basic education. He loaned them texts on science, history, and medicine, sitting with them by lamplight to explain complicated concepts. He told Judah during one of these visits that he saw exceptional potential in all 6 children, that with proper nurturing, they could become anything they wished. The comment planted a seed of possibility in Judah's mind, a future extending beyond mere survival. Miss Williams, emboldened by the community's changing attitude, began to include Apache history and culture in her lessons. She asked Tala to visit the classroom and share stories about her people's traditions, their deep knowledge of the land, their complex social structures. Tala, initially hesitant about speaking publicly, discovered she had a gift for teaching. She brought artifacts, baskets woven with intricate patterns, tools crafted from stone and bone, medicines derived from desert plants. The white children, their curiosity overcoming their parents' prejudices, listened with rapt attention as she explained a worldview that honored the earth as a living entity rather than a resource to be exploited. The bond between Judah and Tala deepened through shared labor and quiet evenings. They worked side by side, expanding the cabin, tending a small garden that Tala coaxed from the reluctant soil, using techniques passed down through generations. They developed a wordless communication, understanding each other's needs through glances and gestures. Judah found himself watching her when she didn't notice, observing the grace with which she moved, the strength in her weathered hands, the light in her eyes when she laughed at the children's antics. Something was growing between them, undefined but undeniable, a connection forged in the crucible of shared purpose. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of amber and crimson, Tala spoke of her husband, Dakota. She described him with love and respect, a man who had been a good father, a skilled hunter, a respected voice in their band. She said that his death had nearly broken her, that she had contemplated ending her own life rather than facing the future alone with 6 children. Then she turned to Judah, her dark eyes reflecting the dying light, and said something that stopped his breath. She told him that Dakota had appeared to her in a dream during their journey to Ironwood Gulch, that he had shown her a vision of a man with pale eyes and a good heart, and told her that this man would protect what he could not. She said she believed Judah was that man, sent by her husband's spirit to save his family. Judah, uncomfortable with the spiritual significance Tala attributed to their meeting, tried to deflect with practical words. He said he had simply done what any decent person would do. Tala smiled, a sad, knowing expression, and told him that the desert was full of people who would have ridden past. She said that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. She said he had chosen, in that moment beneath the saguaro, to abandon his solitary safety and embrace a future of complications and commitment. That, she said, was the mark of a true warrior, regardless of what people called themselves. The children thrived in the stability and love that their new life provided. They grew taller, stronger, their smiles coming more easily. They developed distinct personalities despite their identical appearances. Asher became Judah's shadow, following him on his rounds, learning to read tracks and handle horses with patient determination. Naomi spent hours with Dr. Gideon, absorbing medical knowledge with intense focus, already declaring her intention to become a healer. Micah filled every scrap of paper with drawings, capturing the desert's beauty with an artist's eye. Seth and Rachel, inseparable twins even among sextuplets, developed a gift for music, singing harmonies that made listeners weep. Leah, the observer, wrote poetry in a mixture of English and Apache, bridging worlds through language. But the deepest revelation came from an unexpected source. Tala's mother, before dying, had entrusted her with a family treasure, an ancient text passed down through generations, containing astronomical observations and celestial maps created by Apache ancestors who had studied the night sky with the same dedication as any European scholar. The text, written on treated animal hide in a combination of pictographs and symbols, had been carefully preserved through decades of migration and conflict. Tala brought it out one evening, unwrapping it from its protective layers of soft leather, and showed it to Judah with reverent care. The revelation stunned him. He had, like most settlers, internalized the belief that Apache culture was primitive, lacking the sophistication of European civilization. This text, with its detailed star charts and complex mathematical notations, shattered that assumption. Tala explained that her people had always been scholars of the sky, using the stars for navigation, for marking seasons, for understanding their place in the cosmos. Her grandmother had been a star woman, a keeper of this knowledge, and had taught Tala the meanings behind each symbol before she died. Dr. Gideon, when shown the text, recognized its significance immediately. He contacted colleagues in distant cities, scholars who might help translate the more obscure symbols. Within weeks, he received a package containing books on ancient astronomy and a letter from a professor in San Francisco, expressing fascination with the Apache star charts. The professor noted that some of the observations predated European contact by centuries, representing an independent astronomical tradition of remarkable accuracy. He asked permission to publish the findings, offering to credit Tala and her ancestors as the rightful scholars. The arrival of a telescope, donated by the excited professor and delivered via a circuitous route through multiple settlements, changed everything. Judah set it up on a plateau near the cabin, a spot with minimal light interference and sweeping views of the sky. The first night they used it, gathering the entire family around the instrument as stars emerged in their billions, felt like a sacred ceremony. Tala identified constellations using both Apache names and the European designations she had learned from books, pointing out planets, nebulae, and distant galaxies invisible to the naked eye. Word of the telescope spread through Ironwood Gulch with predictable speed. Curiosity overcame lingering prejudice, and families began making the journey to the Albright cabin for the star watches that Tala and Judah began hosting every Friday evening. The plateau became a gathering place where ranchers and shopkeepers, children and elders, stood together in the darkness and marveled at the universe. Tala taught them the Apache constellations, stories woven into starlight, while Miss Williams added Greek and Roman mythology. The children took turns managing the telescope, helping visitors locate specific celestial objects, explaining what they were seeing with confident expertise. The star watches became more than astronomy lessons. They became a space where the walls between cultures dissolved, where people stood side by side in humble acknowledgement of their shared insignificance beneath the infinite cosmos. Hester Vance, remarkably transformed, brought cookies and hot cider. Mrs. Hannigan donated blankets for cold nights. The sheriff, a taciturn man who had initially warned Judah about bringing trouble to town, arrived with his family and confessed, with awkward sincerity, that he had never imagined the night sky held such wonders. He thanked Tala for opening his eyes to beauty he had been too blind to see. During one particularly clear night, when the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of diamond dust, Judah stood apart from the crowd and watched his family. Tala, surrounded by eager students, pointed toward the heavens with sure gestures. The 6 children moved through the crowd with easy confidence, answering questions, adjusting the telescope, sharing their knowledge with generous enthusiasm. He realized, with profound clarity, that they had achieved something he had never imagined possible. They had not merely survived the frontier's cruelty, they had transformed it, creating a community where there had been only division, building bridges where there had been only walls. Asher found him in the darkness, approaching with the quiet step he had learned from his mother. The boy was nearly 7 now, taller and more confident, but he still sought Judah's presence when troubled or thoughtful. He asked in the direct way children have of cutting through complexity, if Judah was happy. Judah, surprised by the question, considered it carefully. Happiness had never been a goal in his solitary life. Survival, self-sufficiency, those had been his aims. But yes, he realized, looking at this child who called him father, at the woman who had brought light into his isolation, at the community gathered in peaceful contemplation of infinity, yes, he was happy. He told Asher so. And the boy's face split into a radiant smile that made Judah's chest ache with an emotion he could finally name as love. The peace they had built, fragile and hard-won, shattered on a cold October morning when riders appeared on the horizon. Judah spotted them from the corral where he was working with a young mare, 6 figures silhouetted against the dawn sky, moving with purpose toward his property. Something in their formation, in the deliberate way they approached, sent alarm racing down his spine. He called for Tala, his voice sharp with warning. She emerged from the cabin, took one look at the approaching riders, and her face went pale. They were Apache warriors, though not from Tala's original band. These men belonged to a resistance group that had refused to surrender to the reservation system, choosing instead to continue fighting from hidden strongholds deep in the mountains. Their leader, a man named Kuruk, was known throughout the territory as both a brilliant tactician and a ruthless enemy of white settlement. Tala recognized him immediately. He had been a friend of her late husband, Dakota, had fought beside him in numerous conflicts. His presence here was no coincidence. The 6 warriors dismounted with fluid grace, their weapons visible, but not immediately threatening. Kuruk stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury. He spoke in Apache, his words rapid and sharp as arrows. Tala responded in kind, her voice steady despite the fear Judah could see in the tension of her shoulders. The exchange continued for several minutes, growing increasingly heated. Finally, Tala turned to Judah and translated, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Kuruk had come for the children. Word had reached his band that Dakota's wife and children lived among the white settlers, that they attended white schools, wore white clothing, and spoke the white man's language. This, he declared, was a betrayal of everything the Apache were fighting to preserve. The children belonged with their people, learning the old ways, preparing to continue the resistance. He demanded that Tala return with him immediately, bringing the children back to their rightful place among those who shared their blood. Tala's refusal was immediate and absolute. She told Kuruk that her husband had died fighting a losing war, that his death had left her and her children vulnerable to abandonment by their own band, that the man standing beside her, this white cowboy, had shown more honor and loyalty than those who claimed to defend Apache values. She said her children had a future here, education, safety, acceptance. She would not throw that away to pursue vengeance that would only lead to more death. Kuruk's face darkened with rage. He called her a traitor, said she had forgotten who she was, accused her of letting the white man's poison corrupt Dakota's legacy. He pointed at Judah with undisguised contempt, calling him a colonizer who had stolen an Apache family to assuage his guilt or satisfy his unnatural desires. He said that allowing the children to remain here was condemning them to a life of humiliation, of being forever caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. The children, drawn by the commotion, emerged from the cabin. They lined up instinctively behind their mother and Judah, 6 pairs of dark eyes watching the confrontation with a mixture of fear and defiance. Asher stepped forward, his small frame somehow projecting authority beyond his years. He spoke in Apache, his words clear and deliberate. He told Kuruk that Judah was his father now, that this cabin was his home, that he remembered his birth father with honor but had chosen his future. His siblings nodded in fierce agreement, moving closer to Judah in a united front. The standoff could have ended in bloodshed. Kuruk's hand moved toward the rifle slung across his back, and his warriors tensed, reading his intention. But before violence could erupt, Dr. Gideon's wagon crested the hill, carrying the physician and Miss Williams, who had planned to visit for their regular Friday dinner and Star Watch preparation. Their arrival shifted the dynamic, transforming a private confrontation into something more complex. Gideon, understanding the situation with quick intelligence, positioned himself between the two groups, his presence a neutral buffer. Kuruk found himself facing not just a cowboy and an Apache woman, but representatives of the community that had embraced the Albright family. Miss Williams, her Boston education giving her an articulate authority, spoke directly to him in carefully enunciated English, which Tala translated. She told him she had taught his people's children, that they were brilliant and kind, that they excelled in every subject. She asked if denying them education served the Apache cause, if keeping them from knowledge that could help their people survive in a changing world was truly honor. She challenged his definition of betrayal, asking if abandoning children to die in the desert was somehow more honorable than saving them. Dr. Gideon added his voice, speaking of the medical knowledge Naomi was acquiring, knowledge that could save Apache lives if she chose to use it for her people. He spoke of Seth and Rachel's music, which had begun to blend Apache songs with Western harmonies, creating something new and beautiful. He spoke of Micah's art, which documented Apache culture with loving detail, preserving it for future generations. He asked Kuruk to consider whether purity of isolation served his people better than strategic adaptation. The arguments wore at Kuruk's certainty. He was a warrior, trained to see the world in clear divisions of friend and enemy, us and them. But these white people spoke with genuine respect for Apache culture, and the children themselves seemed healthy, educated, and fiercely loyal to both their heritage and their new family. His warriors watched him, waiting for his decision, and Judah could see the internal struggle playing across the man's weathered face. Finally, Kuruk spoke again, his voice tired beneath the anger. He said he would not take the children by force, but he would not accept this situation as right. He prophesied that Judah's protection would fail, that the white man's tolerance was temporary, that the children would eventually face a reckoning for existing between worlds. He warned Tala that she was raising her children to be strangers to their own people, that if they ever needed the Apache might not claim them. Then he and his warriors mounted their horses and rode away, disappearing into the desert as silently as they had come. The aftermath of the confrontation left everyone shaken. Tala wept for the first time since Judah had known her, grieving for the complicated loss the encounter represented. She had been forced to choose between her past and her future, between her people's expectations and her children's survival. Judah held her while she cried, his own heart heavy with the knowledge that his choice to save them had created ripples of consequence he was only beginning to understand. The children processed the event with remarkable maturity. Asher, acting as spokesman for his siblings, told Judah that evening that they understood Kuruk's anger, but stood by their decision. They said they were proud to be Apache and proud to be Albrights, and they refused to believe they had to choose one or the other. Naomi added that she intended to use her medical knowledge to help both white settlers and Apache people, that healing knew no racial boundaries. The others echoed similar sentiments, their young voices firm with conviction. But Kuruk's words had planted seeds of doubt in Judah's mind. He lay awake that night, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling beams, wondering if he had been selfish in claiming this family. Had he saved them, or merely transplanted them from one form of suffering to another? Would they eventually come to resent him for cutting them off from their heritage? Was he capable of being the father they needed, or was he just a lonely man playing at a role he could never truly fulfill? Tala found him outside just before dawn, standing on the plateau where they held the star watches. She approached silently, standing beside him as the sky began to lighten in the east. She spoke without looking at him, her voice soft but certain. She told him that Kuruk was wrong about many things, but right about one. The children would face challenges for existing between worlds. But those challenges would make them stronger, wiser, more capable of building bridges that desperate times required. She said that Judah had not stolen her family. He had saved them and, in doing so, had given them the greatest gift possible, the freedom to choose their own path. She turned to face him then, her hand reaching up to touch his bearded jaw with gentle fingers. She said that Dakota had been a good husband, a warrior she had loved deeply, but he was gone, claimed by a conflict that had no winners. She said that she had spent months grieving, but that grief had to end for life to continue. She told Judah with quiet directness that she saw him not as a savior or a white benefactor, but as a man of deep integrity who had proven his worth through consistent action. She said the children had chosen him as their father, and she had chosen him as well, in ways that went beyond gratitude or convenience. Judah, overwhelmed by the weight of her words, could only manage a hoarse whisper asking what she meant. Tala smiled. That rare, transformative expression that made her face luminous. She said she meant that she loved him, that she had been falling in love with him through all these months of shared struggle and small kindnesses. She said that if he felt the same, if he could see her as more than a responsibility or a refugee he had rescued, then perhaps they could build something together that was neither Apache nor white, but simply theirs. Judah's response was not verbal. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a fierce tenderness that spoke of longing finally acknowledged. He told her, his voice breaking with emotion, that he had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to be truly seen by another person. He said she had taught him what family meant, what home felt like, what love could be when it was built on mutual respect and shared purpose. He said he loved her children who had become his children, loved the life they had created against all odds. They stood together as the sun rose, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Two people from impossibly different worlds who had found in each other a home more real than any physical place. Below them, the cabin stirred to life, smoke rising from the chimney as the children began their morning routines. The day ahead held the same challenges as every day, maintaining the fragile peace with town, educating the children, building a sustainable life. But those challenges now carried a different weight, transformed by love acknowledged and mutual commitment sealed. Winter arrived with unusual severity that year, bringing snowstorms that buried the desert under white drifts and temperatures that plunged below freezing for weeks at a time. The harsh weather tested the community's preparations, and for once, the Albright family's survival skills became a communal asset rather than a source of suspicion. Tala's knowledge of preserving food, of creating insulated shelters, of reading weather signs and the behavior of animals, helped Ironwood Gulch endure the worst winter in living memory. She taught the townswomen techniques for stretching food supplies, for making clothing that provided maximum warmth, for treating cold-related injuries with natural remedies. Judah's cabin, expanded and reinforced through months of labor, proved remarkably resilient against the elements. The family gathered around the fireplace during long evenings, the children taking turns reading aloud from books borrowed from Miss Williams or Dr. Gideon's libraries. The intimate space fostered a deep sense of security, a cocoon against the hostile world outside. They played games, told stories, sang songs that blended Apache traditions with Western ballads. The children's laughter, once rare and hesitant, now filled the rooms with easy frequency. In late January, during a brief thaw between storms, riders approached the cabin once again. But these were not Apache warriors. They wore the blue uniforms of the U.S. Cavalry, led by a captain whose brass buttons gleamed in the weak winter sun. Judah felt his blood turn cold as he stepped outside to meet them, positioning himself between the soldiers and his family. The captain, a weathered man with tired eyes, dismounted and introduced himself as Captain William Morrison. He stated his business without preamble. He had been ordered to investigate reports of an Apache woman and children living among white settlers in Ironwood Gulch. The captain's tone was not hostile, but his presence represented the full weight of federal authority and the reservation system that had confined most Apache people to designated lands. He explained that all Apache individuals were required by law to register with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and reside on assigned reservations. Failure to comply could result in forced relocation or, in extreme cases, imprisonment. He asked to speak with Tala to verify her identity and determine her legal status. Tala emerged from the cabin with quiet dignity, the children arrayed behind her like a protective wall. She met the captain's gaze without flinching and answered his questions in clear English. She identified herself, confirmed her Apache heritage, and explained the circumstances that had led to her current situation. She spoke of abandonment, of near death in the desert, of rescue and subsequent adoption into a new life. She made no apologies and no pleas for mercy. She simply stated facts, leaving the captain to draw his own conclusions. Captain Morrison listened with grave attention, occasionally glancing at the children, at their well-fed faces and warm clothing, at the obvious bond between them and Judah. He asked about their education, their health, their treatment in the community. Miss Williams and Dr. Gideon, who had been alerted to the soldiers' arrival, appeared at the cabin to provide testimony. They spoke passionately about the children's academic achievements, their integration into the community, the positive impact the entire family had made on Ironwood Gulch. Mrs. Hannigan arrived, breathless from hurrying through the snow, to add her voice to the defense. The captain found himself facing not a simple case of reservation non-compliance, but a complex situation that defied easy categorization. These Apache people were not living in hiding or causing trouble. They had been genuinely abandoned by their own band and subsequently rescued by a white man who had taken on full legal and moral responsibility for their welfare. They were educated, healthy, and apparently happy. They had the support of the community's most respected members. The letter of the law demanded their removal to a reservation, but the spirit of justice suggested otherwise. Captain Morrison made his decision after long consideration. He told Tala that he would file a report stating that he had found no Apache individuals in Ironwood Gulch, only the family of Judah Albright, a white rancher. He said that if anyone questioned this report, he would testify that the woman in question appeared to be of mixed Mexican heritage, a common circumstance on the frontier, and that her children were legally Judah's wards. He warned them that this deception would not withstand serious scrutiny, but that the current chaos of frontier administration meant serious scrutiny was unlikely. He advised them to formalize Judah's guardianship through legal adoption proceedings as soon as possible. The captain's mercy came with explanation. He told them, his voice heavy with experiences that haunted him, that he had spent years enforcing reservation policies he had come to view as fundamentally unjust. He had witnessed starvation on reservations, disease, despair. He had seen families torn apart, children sent to boarding schools designed to erase their culture, warriors reduced to begging for rations. He said that if he could spare one family from that fate, by interpreting his orders with creative flexibility, he would do so. He said there was enough suffering in the world without adding to it through rigid adherence to cruel policies. After the soldiers departed, the community celebrated the reprieve with quiet joy. But Judah understood that they now lived under a sword of Damocles, their security dependent on bureaucratic oversight, remaining lax. He made the journey to the territorial capital as soon as weather permitted. spending precious savings on a lawyer who specialized in frontier adoption law. The legal process was complicated by Tala's lack of documentation, by the children's ambiguous status, by racial laws that made interracial families legally problematic. But the lawyer, moved by their story and perhaps by the generous fee Judah offered, found creative solutions. The adoption was finalized in late March, on paper at least, giving Judah legal guardianship of all 6 children. Tala's status remained more complicated. Frontier law did not recognize Apache marriages as legally binding, which meant she was, in the eyes of white authority, simply an unwed mother. The solution, the lawyer suggested delicately, would be for her and Judah to marry. This would grant her protection as the wife of a white citizen, would legitimize the children's status as members of a recognized family unit, and would provide legal cover against future scrutiny. The proposal of marriage, when Judah made it formal that evening, was not the romantic gesture he might have wished. It was practical, wrapped in legal necessity and pragmatic benefit. But Tala saw through the awkward words to the emotion beneath. She accepted with tears in her eyes, not of sadness but of gratitude for a future that had seemed impossible just months before. They married in a simple ceremony at Dr. Gideon's home, witnessed by Miss Williams, Mrs. Hannigan, and a handful of other townspeople who had become genuine friends. Tala wore a simple dress of blue cotton, and Judah wore his one good suit, brushed and cleaned for the occasion. The minister, an elderly man who had seen the frontier transform from wilderness to civilization over decades, spoke words about love, transcending boundaries, about families being built through choice as much as blood. He blessed their union with genuine warmth, noting that their marriage represented the best hope for the future, a bridge between cultures that respected both. When Judah kissed his bride, sealing their vows, the children erupted in joyous cheers, and even cynical Mrs. Hannigan wiped tears from her weathered face. Years passed with the quiet accumulation of ordinary days that constitute a life well lived. The Albright children grew into remarkable young people, each one carving out a unique path while maintaining the unbreakable bond of their shared history. Asher, true to his early promise, became Judah's full partner in the ranching operation, eventually expanding it to include breeding programs that combined his inherited understanding of animal behavior with modern techniques learned from agricultural texts. At 19, he was respected throughout the territory as one of the finest horse trainers in the region. Naomi fulfilled her childhood dream, studying medicine under Dr. Gideon's mentorship, with such dedication that he arranged for her to attend a women's medical college in California. She returned 2 years later as a certified physician, setting up practice in Ironwood Gulch and serving both the white and Apache communities with equal commitment. Her clinic became a symbol of healing in multiple senses, a place where old enemies could sit in the same waiting room, united by their common humanity and need. Micah's art gained recognition beyond the frontier, his paintings of desert landscapes and Apache life exhibited in galleries as far away as San Francisco and New York. He used his success to advocate for Apache rights, his visual storytelling giving voice to a people too often reduced to stereotypes or statistics. Seth and Rachel formed a musical ensemble that performed throughout the Southwest, their unique blend of Apache songs and Western melodies earning them invitations to prestigious venues. Leah became a teacher like Miss Williams, her gift for languages making her invaluable in educating the children of the region's increasingly diverse population. Judah and Tala's marriage deepened into a partnership of profound mutual respect and abiding love. They expanded the ranch, not into an empire, but into a sustainable operation that employed both white and Apache workers, creating a small oasis of integration in a still divided world. Their home became known as a place where all were welcome, where the Star Watches continued every Friday evening, now attracting visitors from distant settlements who had heard of the magical nights when the cosmos erased all earthly divisions. The challenges never completely disappeared. There were still incidents of prejudice, still moments when the children faced slurs or discrimination. The ghost of Kuruk returned occasionally, not the man himself, but the questions he had raised about identity and belonging. But the Albright children had found an answer that worked for them. They were simultaneously Apache and American, children of the desert and citizens of a changing nation. They refused to choose one identity over another, instead embodying both with fierce pride. On a spring evening in 1895, the entire family gathered on their familiar plateau for a special star watch. Tala, now in her early 40s with silver threads in her dark hair, stood beside Judah, whose own hair had gone completely white. They were surrounded by their 6 children, now adults, and by a new generation: Naomi's infant daughter, Asher's twin boys, Rachel's toddler son. The grandchildren represented a future that Judah could never have imagined that blazing afternoon when he found a dying woman and 6 children beneath a saguaro. Dr. Gideon, elderly now but still sharp as ever, arrived with his own grandchildren. Miss Williams, who had married the town's blacksmith and raised 3 children of her own, brought them to see the stars through the telescope that had become a treasured community artifact. Mrs. Hannigan, widowed and frail, came supported by her son, insisting she wouldn't miss the anniversary star watch for anything. Even Captain Morrison made a surprise appearance, traveling from his retirement home to visit the family he had once saved through a legal fiction that had somehow become truth. As the stars emerged in their ancient patterns, Judah took his turn at the telescope, adjusting the focus to bring a distant nebula into sharp relief. He thought about the journey that had led to this moment, about the frightened man he had been, convinced that solitude was safety and attachment was risk. He thought about the 6 terrified children who had looked at him with hope they had no reason to possess, who had trusted him when he had barely trusted himself. He thought about Tala, who had taught him that strength came in many forms, that courage could be quiet, and that love was not a weakness, but the foundation of everything worth building. The desert stretched out below them, vast and indifferent as always, but up here on this plateau, surrounded by family and friends, under stars that had witnessed millions of years of human struggle and triumph, Judah understood something fundamental: the boundaries that divided people, the walls of prejudice and fear. They were as temporary and insignificant as dust devils dancing across the landscape. What endured was this: the choice to see another person's humanity, the decision to extend kindness when cruelty was easier, the commitment to build bridges when the world demanded walls. He called the children and grandchildren close, all of them gathering around the telescope, their faces upturned to the infinite cosmos. He told them the story one more time, the story of a hot afternoon, a desperate family, and a cowboy who didn't know he was capable of love. He told them about the vow he made beneath the saguaro, the words that changed everything. He reminded them that family was not defined by blood alone, but by choice, by commitment, by the willingness to stand together against a world that would rather see you divided. Asher, speaking for his siblings as he always had, told the story from their perspective: the memory of the desert, the crushing thirst, the terror of abandonment, and then the miraculous appearance of a stranger who became their father. He spoke of the lessons they had learned, that identity could be expansive rather than limiting, that love transcended cultural boundaries, that courage was choosing compassion over fear. He said that they had been given a gift, the gift of 2 cultures, 2 languages, 2 ways of understanding the world, and they had a responsibility to use that gift to build the future their parents had envisioned. The grandchildren listened with rapt attention, these mixed heritage children who would grow up in a world still grappling with questions of identity and belonging. They would face their own challenges, their own moments when they had to choose between division and integration, between fear and love. But they would face those challenges equipped with the story of their family, a story that proved transformation was possible, that redemption was real, that a single act of courage could ripple outward to touch lives not yet born. As the night deepened and the Milky Way blazed across the sky in all its impossible glory, Judah Albright stood surrounded by the evidence that his life had meant something. He had saved 7 people from death in the desert, but in truth, they had saved him from a slower death, the death of isolation and loneliness. They had given him purpose, love, and a legacy that would outlive his mortal frame. He had walked into the desert a solitary man and walked out a father. He had opened his heart to strangers and found family. He had crossed the boundaries that society insisted were absolute, and discovered that on the other side was not danger, but grace. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance, indifferent to human dramas and triumphs, yet somehow the perfect backdrop for this moment of profound gratitude. Tala leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his with the easy familiarity of decades shared. She whispered in his ear, half in English, half in Apache, words that meant home, meant love, meant forever. Judah closed his eyes and felt the weight of years, the accumulated treasure of moments just like this one, simple and perfect, the stuff of which actual lives are built. Down in Ironwood Gulch, lights twinkled as families settled into their evening routines, unaware of the gathering on the plateau above them. But some of them perhaps looked up at the stars and remembered the star watches they had attended, the lessons they had learned about the vastness of the cosmos and the insignificance of the prejudices that once seemed so important. Some of them perhaps told their own children about the Albright family, about the cowboy and the Apache woman, about the 6 identical children who had proven that love was stronger than hate, that compassion was braver than cruelty, that family was something you built with your hands and your heart, not something predetermined by blood or law. The story had become legend, as all powerful stories do, embellished and mythologized with each retelling. But at its core remained a simple truth, that on a blazing hot afternoon in 1882, a man had made a choice. He had chosen to stop when he could have ridden past. He had chosen to care when he could have remained indifferent. He had chosen to become a father when he could have stayed solitary. And that choice, made in a moment but sustained over decades, had changed everything. Not just for him, not just for the 7 lives he saved, but for an entire community that learned to see beyond its own fear and prejudice to the shared humanity, binding all people together. Years later, when Judah was gone and his children had children of their own, when the frontier had been tamed and the Apache wars had faded into history, when the boundaries between cultures had blurred in ways both beautiful and complicated, the story endured. It was told around campfires and dinner tables, passed down as a reminder of what was possible when courage met compassion. It became a parable about the power of love to transform not just individuals, but entire communities. It stood as testament to the truth that family is not discovered but created, that home is not a place but a feeling of belonging, and that sometimes the most heroic act is simply refusing to abandon those who need you most. The Albright Plateau, with its telescope and its star charts, became a landmark, a place where people went to remember that beneath the vast cosmos, all human divisions shrink to their proper insignificance. The story of Judah and Tala, of 6 abandoned children who became bridge builders between worlds, continued to inspire generations who face their own version of the same choice, whether to build walls or bridges, whether to give in to fear or embrace love, whether to see differences as threats or as opportunities for growth and connection. And in the retelling, the story reminded each new generation that the most important boundaries are not those drawn on maps or written into laws, but those we choose to cross or to defend in our own hearts.